Good morning, good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to give a couple more minutes for folks to get logged in online and join us for our class this morning, following on the study of Jeremiah. This morning we're going to be covering this section in Jeremiah chapter 32 through 38. So as you're getting everything set up there in your online session, logging in, whatnot, get your Bible and get turned to Jeremiah 32. And you might even want to have a pencil and something to write with there next to you so that you have a chance to take some notes. We're going to be covering quite a lot of material this morning, so just be aware that we're going to need to be able to keep a lot of ideas in our head at the same time and think through what's going on. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes still to get all settled. Should have brought a cup of coffee with me, I guess, but maybe one of you can have some coffee for me. As we get started this morning, I want to jump off by reading in Psalm 91 to sort of set the tone for this morning. Psalm 91. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. For He will deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with His pinions, and under His wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and buckler. You will not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in darkness, nor the destruction that wastes at noonday. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only look with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked. Because you have made the Lord your dwelling place, the Most High, who is my refuge. No evil shall be allowed to befall you, no plague come near your tent. For He will command His angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. On their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. You will tread on the lion and the adder, the young lion and the serpent you will trample underfoot. Because He holds fast to me in love, I will deliver Him. I will protect Him because He knows my name. When He calls to me, I will answer Him. I will be with Him in trouble. I will rescue Him and honor Him. With long life I will satisfy Him and show Him my salvation. That last three verses being from the mouth of God. Jeremiah 32 through 38 this morning. We find Jeremiah in the court of the guard. Turning over to Jeremiah 32. This section is bookended with the court of the guard. We find him there in verse 2, shut up in the court of the guard. At the end of chapter 38, we'll see a statement that says, Jeremiah remained in the court of the guard until the day that Jerusalem was taken. All of this section is bound together by that. But I want to remind us, and we do have our online Q&A set up this morning, and I'll be watching that periodically throughout the morning to see if there are questions that pop up. And I'll bring up the slide at the end. If you've got any questions, please go ahead and post those online. I think we'll have a little bit of time at the end to answer questions that you might have, any discussion that you might want to hear about. Slido.com, event code 1789. Now, our context here is this last major section in Jeremiah, spanning from chapter 27 to the end. And the last time we met, we covered just the small section in chapter 30 and 31 that presented the climax in the book of Jeremiah, the new covenant. And, you know, what are we supposed to do? We got this climax, this fantastic, beautiful picture of this new covenant that's been presented to us. Now what? That's where we find ourselves. You might not feel like this morning. If I would assume, you're kind of logging into class. This is a regular routine. Go to Bible class. Kind of getting your mind going in the right direction of where we are this morning. But think back for a second with me to chapter 31. Maybe even look back at verse 31 and following and remember that we've heard these words where God has said, I will put my law within them, I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. There's this beautiful, lovely God with us promise, covenant that God has made. But for many of us, and this morning I want to spend my effort really talking to those of us who have been in the church for a long time, maybe associated with Christianity, one form or another, for a long time, and really ask you to reevaluate, rethink about some of the things that you assume to be true. In a sense, this is a question of worldview. And you say, well, why use that big word, worldview? Everybody uses that word just whenever they want to act like they're really smart. And I don't intend to do that today, but I do want to tell you what that means to me, in the sense that if you were to ask somebody about their, quote, worldview, it's not something they would really be able to answer. Rather, it's something that if it were taken away from you, you would feel very uncomfortable. You would feel very lost. It would feel like finding yourself in a place that you don't know well and you're not really oriented to your surroundings. If you've ever had a dream where you dreamed that you woke up someplace that you didn't know where you were and you felt very uncomfortable and disoriented, that's the feeling that you would have if somebody were to challenge and disrupt your worldview. Worldview is that thing that kind of gives us a construct that we work in, that we live in, that we shape ourselves in, and it gives us a certain amount of comfort. Not because it's like a warm blanket, but it's because what we build our ideas on top of. So when God comes and says, I'm going to make a new covenant, one reaction to that might be, well, then what are we supposed to do now? Big contrast with the Old Testament, Exodus, he brings the people out, comes to Mount Sinai, gives them the 10 Commandments, makes the covenant with them, and then we've got chapter after chapter after chapter into Leviticus, rules and regulations, orders. You're supposed to do this on this day, this sacrifice this time of year. You're supposed to respond this way if somebody hurts your cow. All these things that you can use to shape what your response is supposed to be in all sorts of scenarios. And here we find in chapter 31 of Jeremiah a new covenant, but there's no rules that follow it. There's no regulations that come after this that try to explain how we are supposed to shape ourselves under this new covenant. So, what is this supposed to look like now? That's where Jeremiah 32 through 38 comes in. Jeremiah buys a field. That's chapter 32. At the end of this conversation, I'm actually going to bring in the story from Matthew 22, where Jesus is asked about paying taxes. I know you're thinking, how in the world is he going to connect Jesus paying taxes to Jeremiah buying a field. And in between all of this is sandwiched this conversation that goes on, this back and forth that goes on between Jeremiah and Zedekiah. Zedekiah was the last king of Jerusalem before they were carried off to exile in Babylon. Both of these I'm going to use, taxes, Jesus, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, and Jeremiah buying the field. And in fact, this whole section is being used as a parable to try to answer this question for us of what is it that we're supposed to be doing with all of this? And my little note there is, who do you fear? And the reason I put that there is that this entire section, chapter 32 through 38, is really wrapped around an inner feeling, this fear that might drive who we are inside. Not fear like I'm scared of heights or I'm scared of talking to people, but this is the worldview issue. This is the idea when we say fear God. This is what we base ourselves on. This is what we build ourselves on. This is the thing that if it was pulled out from under us, would make us feel very disoriented. It'd be like the rug being pulled out from under us. And that's disorienting. It's unsettling. It's something that we fear. And you'll find fear throughout this entire section. Now, that's the backdrop for where we are in Jeremiah 32 through 38. So let me give you, it's a big section, so let me give you an overview without reading the entire thing. Okay, starting off, Jeremiah is in the court of the guard. The word of the Lord comes to him and says, hey, your cousin's going to come and tell you to buy a field. Jeremiah says, okay. Several days later, his cousin, Hanamel, comes to him and says, hey, Jeremiah, you have the right of redemption on this field. Would you like to purchase it? Jeremiah says, oh, wow, I guess that really was a word from God because my cousin is now here, so I will buy the field. So he gets together the 17 shekels of silver. He buys the field. He signs the deed. The deed is sealed. He actually gets one set of deeds sealed and signed and a copy for his own records. He puts them in envelopes and stores them away in an earthen vessel for safe keeping. You're thinking, what in the world is this going on here? Jeremiah doesn't even know, because right after this, he prays to God and he says, you had me do all of this, and I don't know why. What's going on? And to that prayer, God responds with a retelling of this new covenant. I'm going to do this wonderful thing. All these people have gone astray. They've sacrificed children. They've set up the abomination in the temple. They've done horrible, terrible things, and I am going to cleanse them of the sin that is in their hearts. I am going to remove them from this place, and then I'm going to bring them back. I'm going to restore my people. I'm going to rebuild the kingdom. I'm going to put myself in their hearts. I'm going to be their God, and they are going to be my people. It's this wonderful retelling, chapter 32, verse 36 and following, of the new covenant yet again. Interesting little addition here compared to chapter 31 is a phrase in verse 40 where God says, I will put the fear of me in their hearts. I will put the fear of me in their hearts. Moving on to chapter 32 or 33 and 34, there's a contrast here. Chapter 33 is this picture of the Good Shepherd. It's very messianic prophecy, talking about who Jesus is going to be. It even says, flocks shall again pass under the hands of the one who counts them. This God, Jesus, the Good Shepherd, this beautiful picture. And that's contrasted with Zedekiah in chapter 34, where Zedekiah actually promises to the people that he's going to provide them liberty. and then he takes it away from them, changes his mind, and subjects them to slavery again. And God says, this is the contrast. This is what we're dealing with when you say, well, what are we supposed to do in this new covenant, God? One picture, Jesus, the good shepherd, shepherding the flock. The other picture, rulers lording it over the people, promising them things that they cannot provide them. Chapter 35, we jump into something that happened earlier, because it says this is during the time of Jehoiakim. Now, Jehoiakim is 2 kings earlier from Zedekiah. We jump back in time, and the first thing that we see in the time of Jehoiakim is an interaction between Jeremiah and the Rechabites, who have their entire existence refused to drink any fermented drink, any alcoholic beverage. Why? And they say, because somebody told us a long time ago that we were supposed to, so we don't do that. They have no other reason. They don't have an explanation. They are obedient without knowing exactly why they're supposed to be doing it or what it's going to be for them. They are simply obedient because that's what they've been told to do. They have kept the command that their father gave them. That's what it says. That's contrasted with Jehoiakim. See, God comes to Jeremiah. He tells Jeremiah, these are the wonderful things that you need to tell all the people. This is what's going to happen if they don't repent. Write all this stuff down. Jeremiah gets his scribe Baruch, who is his secretary, his helper. Baruch writes all of this down on a scroll. He takes it and he reads it in the temple. All the teachers of the law say, oh my goodness, this is amazing. This is really scary. We've got to tell the people what's going on. And so they bring Baruch before the king and they say, you've got to hear what this guy has to say that God came and told. This is just, we've got to listen. You've got to listen to this. And they come before Jehoiakim. It's wintertime. He's in his winter palace. There's a fire roaring in the fireplace. And Baruch starts to read this scroll. And every few lines, it says, Jehoiakim cuts off the bottom of the scroll and throws it in the fire. Again, this is a parable, okay? This is a contrast between a people who obeyed, regardless of their understanding of why they were doing anything, versus a man who has no regard for God's word whatsoever, throws it in the fire, burns it all up. In fact, it even says here in chapter 36, verse 24, that neither the king nor any of his servants who heard all of these words were afraid. They were not afraid at all, nor did they tear their garments. They showed no fear of God in what they were doing. But then God comes back and renews the fact that his word is eternal, because he comes back to Jeremiah and he says, hey, take another scroll out. I'm going to tell you what to write down again, and you can just copy it down again, because my word doesn't go away just because somebody threw it in the fire. So he writes all that down again. Jeremiah goes back now to Zedekiah. We go back to the present day. Jeremiah is back talking to Zedekiah, trying to convince him of what's going to happen. Jeremiah is talking. Zedekiah is very upset. This is bad. Zedekiah puts Jeremiah in prison. And this is where he actually gets put in the court of the guard in the first place. Then there's some people that come to, chapter 38 is very important. There's people that come to Zedekiah and they say, we've got to do something about Jeremiah. Even though he's in prison, even though he's in the court of the guard, he's right there where all the soldiers are, and he's sitting there telling them that if they lay down their weapons, they will get their life as a spoil of war, and they will be saved, and that's just not good for our soldiers. Hello, they're not going to want to fight if Jeremiah's over here telling them it's going to be better for them to just not fight. So this is terrible. He's undermining your authority, King Zedekiah, and he's weakening the hand of the soldiers. oh, well, this cannot be. So they throw Jeremiah in the pit, in the cistern, in the mud. He sinks down, no food, no water. Thankfully, somebody comes and rescues him. Guess who it is? It's an Ethiopian. Now, if that's not Peter and the Ethiopian eunuch, I mean, there's too many parallels here to jump into because this section is just fantastic. The Ethiopian comes and saves Jeremiah from the pit, okay? He pulls him up. Jeremiah comes back. They get him up out of the cistern. He still remains in the court of the guard, though. And then at the very end, chapter 38, this final interaction between Jeremiah and Zedekiah. Finally, it seems like Zedekiah might be turning the corner. He might be hearing what Jeremiah is trying to say. He asked Jeremiah to come back and tell him again, what really is this? Please tell me again, And if you want to know the context of why Zedekiah might actually be humbling himself a little bit at this point, it's because Zedekiah had gone off and he had made a deal, he had made an alliance with the Egyptians because he thought that if he got together with the Egyptians, he would be able to get the Egyptians to help him and fight against the Babylonians and win. But the Egyptians left. And when they left, Zedekiah now was exposed and he's feeling unsettled. The rug has been pulled out from under him. And he's trying to figure out, what do I do now? And Jeremiah tells him, he says, look, if you obey, God will spare your life. But if you don't surrender, you will be given into the hand of the Chaldeans, and they're going to burn the city to the ground. In verse 19 of chapter 38, the story tells us that King Zedekiah says to Jeremiah, I am afraid of the Judeans who have deserted to the Chaldeans, lest I be handed over to them and they deal cruelly with me. Zedekiah is unwilling to change because he's afraid of what other people are going to think about him, are going to do to him. Fear of man versus fear of God. So when you find this new covenant and you're asking, what is this supposed to look like? Similar to Jesus' teaching, he doesn't answer this with a book of rules. He answers this with a set of parables to try and contrast for you a life that is shaped by the fear of God, whether you end up in the pit in the court of the guard or not, versus a life that is shaped by the fear of man that has no foundation and only leads to death. What do we do with that? Well, we really need to spend some time considering this, because it's not the picture that we would like to see. If it were up to us, following God every day, following Jesus every day, would not look like being thrown in the cistern in the court of the guard. That's not what we want our life to look like on a daily basis. We want to be able to say that following Jesus is going to look like success in a human sort of way. That our problems will be worked out, we'll have this wonderful family. We like to take those verses that say, I will bless you with mothers and fathers and family, and I will be your... We like the outcome of what happened to Job, but we don't want to deal with what happened to him before that. We don't want to go there because we don't want to deal with the fact that following God may mean that we have to be a parable for the rest of the world we may have to suffer so that they can see the goodness of God. But that's not our purpose. It's not our purpose to go out here and try to suffer or try to be successful. Our purpose is to follow God. This is just like big, how do we make this make any sense? Okay. Several things. What do we want this to look like? Romans, Paul says, the righteousness that we're talking about is manifest apart from the law. I'm going to pull this together. Hold with me. So I'm going to read to you a quote, a long quote here, and this is just one of several things I'm going to talk about. This is the harder one to think about. I'm going to give you some others, and we're going to get to Jesus paying taxes here in a second. So hold with me. But we have to answer this question. What is it that this new covenant is supposed to look like? And before we get into these vignettes, realize that the way that you personally answer the question of what it looks like to follow God in this new covenant is entirely shaped by what you're afraid of. What's the rug you're standing on that you don't want anybody to pull out from under you? Okay? So this first one, this long quote, this is actually a book that was part of my great-grandfather's library. It was handed to me by my grandfather Shields when I was baptized. My great-great-grandfather Shrigley had this in his library. It's a first edition that I have on my shelf, written by Alexander Campbell in 1835. The title of which is very long. A connected view of the principles and rules by which the living oracles may be intelligibly and certainly interpreted. That's the title. And that's actually the short title. Anyway, listen to this quote. And I want you to just kind of let yourself hear this and think about how this makes you feel, how you respond to this. We Americans owe our national privileges and our civil liberties to the Protestant reformers. Martin Luther restored the Bible to the world AD 1534 and boldly defended its claims against the impious and arrogant pretensions of the haughty and tyrannical See of Rome. But unfortunately, at his death, there was no Joshua to lead the people who rallied under the banners of the Bible. It is curious to observe how extremes begot extremes in every step of the Reformation cause to the dawn of the present century. The Saxon reformer had his friends in Sweden, Holland, Germany, England, Scotland. The debate varied not essentially. The Pope and the Protestants, the Lutherans and the Calvinists and the Armenians, the bishops against the presbyters and the Presbyterians among themselves, until by the potency of metaphysics and politics, they are now frittered down to numerous parties. Not done yet. Not until within the present generation did any sect or party in Christendom unite and build upon the Bible alone. Tired of new creeds and new parties in religion, and of the numerous abortive efforts to reform the Reformation, a few individuals began to reflect upon the ways and means to restore primitive Christianity. Sorry for the green box in the top right corner here. The Bible alone is the Bible only. And it says in word and deed, in profession and practice, and this alone can reform the world and save the church. We only profess to work and walk by the rules which will inevitably issue in a pure speech and in right conceptions of that pure and holy and celestial thing called Christianity. The object of this volume is to place before the community in a plain, definitive, and perspicuous style the capital principles, to offer to the public a more matured view of such cardinal principles as are necessary to the right interpretation of the Holy Scriptures. I would like to put before you this morning that entire thing is absolute hogwash. It is terrible. It is ungodly. And if you don't believe me, then ask yourself a simple question. If it is the Bible only and the Bible alone that can reform the world and save the church, then tell me what it was that Christ did exactly. That's a lot to take in. So let me back up a second and give you a couple other examples that might be a little easier on the stomach. You see, my children exhibit a common fear that you see in all people. A fear of being left out of the group. This happened just the other day. My daughters wanted to play a game. We joined together in the front yard. It was an athletic sort of game. One of them was doing better than the other, and so they were getting more turns than the other. So one of them started feeling left out. And the response that child made to being left out was this: let's make a new rule. What? Let's make a new rule. Wanting to change the rules to make sure that she was included. I want to suggest to you today that that's exactly what this quote from Alexander Campbell is. Because this new covenant offers us no rules. It simply says, go and sin no more. And because we're afraid of having the rug pulled out from under us, we want to add new rules to structure our environment in such a way that we can remove the fear that we have that somebody's going to replace us and take our spot. They come to Jesus and they say, should we pay taxes or not? And Jesus says, look at the denarius and tell me whose picture is on that. And they give him a denarius. He looks at it. He says, what's the Caesar's picture? Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Give to God what is God's. And I've heard lots of good things, right? We've all heard lots of good things about, well, this really means that we should give ourselves to God. You know, that's fantastic. Yes, that's exactly what we're talking about in the New Covenant, that we're supposed to sacrifice or be living sacrifices. We're supposed to give ourselves to God. And I've talked in this class about, allowing God to make His appeal through us and getting out of the way and saying, am I making my appeal from a human distinction point of view, or am I allowing God to make His appeal through me towards bringing people to redemption, restoring them to Christ? But this idea of fear that I'm talking about this morning, about having the rug pulled out from under you, really goes to the heart of why they asked God this question in the first place. Why did they come to Jesus wanting to know what they're supposed to do with their money? They wanted to be told that they were doing the right thing. And how many times in the New Testament, in interactions with Christ, did somebody come and say, who's my neighbor? Who am I supposed to love? How many times am I supposed to forgive? Who am I supposed to give my money to? Wanting Christ to finally give them definitive answers and rules so that they would be able to inevitably have come out of them pure speech and right conceptions of the pure and holy and celestial thing called Christianity. And yet every time, what does Christ tell them? He says, go and sin no more. Because as Paul says in Romans, righteousness is a manifest apart from the law. There's not going to be a set of rules. There's not going to be a set of regulations. We can't write down all of the specific ideas and ways that you are supposed to interpret every word of Scripture so that you get everything correct and you can check all the boxes off and make sure that everybody agrees on everything. And as I said a moment ago, this quote that says the Bible alone and the Bible only, which we would most certainly, I would say, a lot of us in Churches of Christ specifically in this restoration movement, we want this to be what we hold on to, and we say, yes, the Bible alone and the Bible only, yes, absolutely, but then we turn that around and say, this alone can reform the world and save the church, as if Christ did nothing. You see, Christ came and died on the cross and was raised, and He alone is the King. It is His kingdom. He did not come and give us regulations so that we could create the church, so that we could bring about all of the right things, so that we could do this for the world. We are not the ones that are able to save ourselves, right? So if our profession and practice is only to follow the rules, we have not done what in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, if your righteousness does not surpass that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will surely not enter the kingdom of heaven. And this entire section in Jeremiah is trying to show you that the way that you answer that question is entirely based on fear, on the rug that you're standing on. I'm going to try and be even more blunt and give you a couple of examples of thought here that I can just throw out, see what you think. And I'm going to jump down here and say, I'll come back to that. If anybody's got a question, you can post that, but I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. We want so badly to be able to specify the role of women in the church. There's nothing wrong with wanting that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to come up with something that helps us to understand what is the right thing for us to decide to do. Okay? That's okay. But what I want to ask you is, Christ came so that we might have life and have it to the full. Are we starting that conversation by saying, how do we make sure that women in our body are being given life? How are the things that we're doing providing life to the women in our congregation? And if that's the place that we're starting the conversation, fine. But if all we're doing is trying to find out what holes they can fit in, we're not offering them life. We want to be able to define Christian marriage and cut out homosexuality and be able to put that in a box and say this is an abomination and it's horrible and it's against the creation of God. And certainly it is. It's an abomination. It is against nature. However, if you are not coming at that with a discussion about how you can love those people, how you can work to heal the sick, feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, show love and kindness because that's what Christ showed you, then you're just creating new rules. If you're worried about if we go over here and we start giving all of our money to orphans' homes, to feed the poor, to homeless shelters, we won't have enough money to pay the bills, keep the lights on, and pay our ministers. We can't do all that. We have to have a special contribution so that we can have a set of money to do benevolence with because all of the rest of our budget is already accounted for. Well, folks, maybe if we sold all of this, maybe if we didn't have any money, maybe we might actually be hungry and go to our brothers and sisters hungry, looking to be fed, and we might get the bread out of the cupboard and say, come in and sit down at the table with me, and we break bread and we have communion together. Instead of being worried whether or not we have nice things to use in a building. Listen to me. Listen to me. The takeaway from this is clear. Christ came that you might have life and have it to the full. And He said, go and sin no more. He said, find someone who is hungry and feed them. Find someone who is thirsty and give them something to drink. Find someone who is your neighbor and share your hope with them. This entire section of Jeremiah starts in chapter 32 and says, listen, Jeremiah, you have the right of redemption. What have I said God is about this entire time? God is always about redemption. That is His purpose. He is wanting to redeem you. He wants you to be reconciled to Him. He wants this to be a reconciling church. That is our job. That is our ministry, to reconcile people to God. The right of redemption is yours, and you can buy the field, folks. You can share your hope with someone else. Walk across the street, post a message, give someone a pat on the back, go and sin no more. Do not be afraid. Man cannot do anything to you. Let God put the fear of Him in your heart and go and sin no more. That's what this whole section is about. It's a lot to take in. I'm certain that you would have questions and discussions about this. I've put a lot of difficult things out there to think about. And I've said a lot of really difficult things to hear. Take it, chew on it. Let me know what you think. We're going to sign off here and get ready for our service this morning. Thanks for being online and joining us for the class. Appreciate you being here and taking the time to join us. Thanks.